Zyra had traveled farther than any being she had ever known. Her ship had sailed past galaxies that glimmered like rivers of fire, through storms of asteroids, and past worlds where life itself seemed almost impossible. She had seen civilizations rise and fall, and she had studied countless intelligent species, learning their ways, their languages, and their rules. Yet nothing in all her knowledge had truly prepared her for Earth. As her ship descended through the clouds, she looked down at the blue and green world with a mixture of awe and trepidation. She had read about humans, studied them in countless reports, watched videos of their history and behavior, but none of that could prepare her for seeing them in person. The city below pulsed with life, a constant flow of movement and sound. Cars honked as they hurried through streets, and thousands of tiny humans scurried along the sidewalks. Their faces were alive with emotion, curiosity, fear, excitement, anger, all in the same moment. Zyra's eyes, adapted to the darkness of space, took in every detail: the bright billboards, the flickering neon lights, the tiny children chasing each other in parks, oblivious to the massive ship now hovering above them. Her heart, if it could be called that, beat faster. She had expected a calculated response, maybe fear or cautious respect. She had expected scientists, military officials, or leaders to meet her first. But what she saw instead was chaos, simple, messy, unpredictable life. Humans were unlike any species she had encountered. They were fragile, yet they moved with such determination. They argued loudly, laughed unexpectedly, ran in opposite directions, and yet somehow survived. Zyra felt a strange pang in her chest, a mixture of curiosity and anxiety she did not fully understand. Could these small, delicate creatures truly comprehend what she was, or what she had come to offer? Her first steps outside her ship were careful. The hatch opened, and a wave of fresh air filled the chamber, carrying scents of grass, exhaust, food, and water. Each scent was unfamiliar, yet it spoke to Zyra in ways she could not translate. She stepped down, her skin shimmering under the city lights. Humans nearby stopped, some frozen in shock, others staring with wide eyes. A few whispered to each other, pointing and gesturing wildly. Zyra's presence was impossible to ignore. She had been called beautiful in countless star systems, her features designed by her people to symbolize grace, wisdom, and harmony. But here, beauty was dangerous, and she saw it in their wary eyes. Despite the fear she inspired, Zyra moved slowly, hands raised in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. She tried to remember everything she had studied about human behavior, every warning and every tip. Keep distance, show calm, avoid sudden movement. Smile, but subtly, not too much. Her gaze swept over the crowd, noting the smallest children hiding behind their parents' legs, teenagers daring each other to approach, and adults trying to appear composed while their minds raced with questions. Then a young man stepped forward. He looked barely older than 20, with messy brown hair and eyes that shone with something Zyra had not anticipated, pure wonder. His steps were hesitant, but there was no fear in his voice when he spoke. Are you real?" he asked, his words trembling yet filled with awe. Zyra's heart skipped a beat. She had expected so many responses: caution, science, disbelief. Not this, not wonder. "I am Zyra," she replied carefully, the words feeling strange on her tongue. She chose them with care, aware that a single mistake could escalate fear into chaos. The young man laughed softly, a sound full of nervous energy and joy, and even that small laugh seemed to ripple through Zyra's thoughts in a way no alien interaction had ever done before. "I'm Jake," he said. "You're amazing." Zyra had prepared for analysis, for study, for diplomacy. She had not prepared for the raw, simple emotion that humans carried. This human, this one small being, was looking at her not with fear, but with awe, hope, and curiosity. Something inside her stirred, a new feeling she had never felt across 1,000 worlds, the fragile, unpredictable, yet undeniable power of connection. As the city lights flickered around her and the wind brushed past her shimmering form, Zyra realized that first contact was going to be far more complicated than she had ever imagined. Humans were chaotic, emotional, and illogical, but perhaps that was their greatest strength. Perhaps they were the ones she had been searching for all along. And for the first time in her life, Zyra felt something like anticipation mixed with fear. She was no longer just an observer. She was a participant in a story she did not yet understand, a story that would challenge her, test her, and maybe, just maybe, teach her what it meant to truly connect. The young man's wide eyes never left Zyra's shimmering form. He took a cautious step closer, and she froze for a moment, unsure if he would run, attack, or faint. But Jake did none of those things. Instead, he smiled, a little awkward, a little nervous, yet entirely genuine. Zyra had studied human expressions, but seeing one in real life, unfiltered and raw, stirred something unfamiliar inside her. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but also capable of warmth that no calculations could measure. I've read about you, Jake said, his voice trembling slightly. I mean, everyone's talking about the alien ship, but I never thought I'd see you, like this. His words were clumsy, filled with hesitation, but Zyra understood the meaning behind them. This human was curious, excited, and cautiously brave. She realized that understanding humans was not just about knowledge, it was about patience, observation, and connection. I am Zyra, she repeated slowly, carefully. She extended a hand, a gesture meant to show peace and friendship. Jake blinked, then slowly raised his own hand and touched hers. The contact was brief, but Zyra felt a shock of warmth that surprised her. Across the vast emptiness of space, across billions of light years, she had never felt anything like this. This small human, with his fragile body and bright eyes, had reached across the divide between species in a way that words alone could never achieve. You're beautiful, Jake whispered almost to himself. He didn't mean her appearance alone. It was the way she carried herself, the calm in her movements, the light in her eyes. Zyra paused, startled by the intensity of his words. In her travels, beauty had always been admired, envied, or feared, but rarely spoken about with such honest emotion. It made her feel seen. For a moment, time seemed to stretch. Zyra studied him, taking in his messy hair, the nervous energy in his stance, the way he smiled despite the chaos of the city around them. Humans were messy, chaotic, sometimes foolish, but also fascinating, unpredictable, and capable of wonder. She realized that this was her first lesson in truly understanding them. Knowledge alone was not enough. She had to feel, observe, and engage. You aren't like anything I imagined, Jake said. His voice was soft, thoughtful. I thought you'd be scary or powerful or, I don't know, unreachable, but you're here and you're kind, I think. His words were hesitant, almost clumsy, yet sincere. Zyra felt her chest tighten with a strange emotion, pride, connection, something between joy and fear. The human's emotions were so raw, so immediate. It was overwhelming, yet strangely beautiful. She wanted to speak, to explain her mission, her journey, her purpose. But words alone seemed insufficient. Instead, she gestured toward the sky, toward the stars that had carried her across the galaxy. She wanted him to see what she had seen, to understand the wonder of her travels, the vastness of space, and the courage it had taken to come here. Jake tilted his head, trying to follow her meaning, and then his face lit up with understanding. You came all this way for us? He asked, awe in his voice. Zyra nodded. It was a simple gesture, yet powerful. She had crossed the stars, left behind the familiar, the safe, to reach these fragile creatures. And now she realized that her journey was only beginning. First contact was not a moment, it was a process, a dance of trust, patience, and understanding. Jake took a deep breath and smiled again. Well, I guess that means we should start being friends? His awkward words made Zyra laugh softly, a sound that surprised even her. It was light, musical, and entirely human. In that moment, the chaos of the city seemed to fade. For the first time, she felt a connection, not just observation, not just study, but a bond, however fragile, with another being. Zyra realized then that first contact was far harder than she had imagined. It wasn't about technology, about gestures, or diplomacy alone. It was about emotions, about trust, about seeing one another as more than shapes or ideas. And in this small, messy human, she saw potential, hope, courage, and something infinitely valuable. The capacity to feel, to love, to connect. As the evening sky turned orange and the city lights began to twinkle, Zyra and Jake stood together in silence, two beings from different worlds, beginning the first chapter of a story that neither of them fully understood. It would not be easy, it would not be simple, but it was real and it was beautiful, and for Zyra, that was enough to take the first step forward. The first days of Zyra's time on Earth were more difficult than she had imagined. Though Jake welcomed her presence with patience and curiosity, the rest of the world reacted with suspicion, fear, and confusion. Wherever she went, people stared, whispered, or fled. Children cried at the sight of her shimmering form, and adults whispered about danger, invasion, or experiments. Zyra had expected challenges, yes, but the intensity of human emotion was overwhelming. Her gestures, meant to be peaceful, sometimes only made things worse. One morning, she offered a small, glowing fruit from her home planet to a group of humans gathered in the park. They screamed and scattered, clutching their phones to record the alien threat. She had intended to share a gift, a token of goodwill, and yet it had sparked panic. Zyra's heart, or whatever emotion close to it that she possessed, ached. Why was it so difficult for these fragile creatures to understand kindness? Even her attempts at communication seemed flawed. Simple words, gestures, and expressions that conveyed clarity to one human could confuse another. A wave could be seen as a threat. A smile could be interpreted as mockery. Zyra had never faced such unpredictable behavior, and she felt the weight of frustration and loneliness pressing down on her. For the first time, she doubted herself. Maybe Earth had been a mistake. Maybe humans were too fragile, too emotional, too chaotic to bridge the gap between species. Yet she could not abandon hope. Jake remained her anchor, patiently explaining, translating, and mediating her actions to the humans around them. "They're scared because they don't understand you," he told her one evening as they watched the sunset together. "It's not that they're bad, they just need time." Zyra listened, nodding, but the ache in her chest remained. Time, yes. Perhaps understanding humans required patience she had not yet mastered. One afternoon, Zyra tried to teach a group of children about the stars. She projected glowing constellations from her hands and shaped miniature planets that hovered in the air. Her goal was to show wonder, to inspire curiosity, and to create connection. But the children screamed, bolted from the field, and hid behind their parents. The adults scolded them. Some glared at Zyra with suspicion. Others muttered about government intervention. Zyra froze in place, the vibrant visions of stars fatting around her as fear replaced fascination. The loneliness of that moment cut deep. Across the universe, she had always found beings willing to learn, to exchange ideas, to marvel at knowledge. Humans were different. They were messy, chaotic, and emotional beyond measure. Their fear was instinctive, their judgment quick. It was exhausting, disheartening, and yet, strangely, it made her want to try even harder. Jake knelt beside her, brushing a lock of hair, or what humans called hair, out of his face, his eyes filled with quiet reassurance. "You can't make them understand all at once," he said softly. "You have to show them you mean no harm, and even then some will still be afraid. But those who stay, who try, they'll see you. They'll understand." His words were simple, but to Zyra they were a lifeline. She realized then that first contact was not a single moment of clarity, but a long path of patience, trial, and perseverance. That night, as Zyra returned to her ship, she stood on the observation deck and gazed at the earth below. The lights of the city twinkled like scattered stars, alive with life, noise, and emotion. She took a deep breath, letting the alien air fill her lungs. Fear, misunderstanding, and conflict had greeted her arrival, but she would not leave. She would learn, adapt, and reach out. Zyra's resolve hardened. She had crossed galaxies, faced impossible dangers, and encountered civilizations that challenged her intellect and courage. She would not be defeated by fear. Humans were messy, yes, but they were also alive in a way no other species she had encountered could ever be. Their hearts, unpredictable as they were, held something she had never seen in all her travels: potential, resilience, and hope. The path ahead would be long, filled with misunderstandings, fear, and conflict. But Zyra, for the first time in her life, understood something deeply human. Connection was worth struggle, and love, even across species, was worth every challenge. She would find a way to bridge the gap. She would make them see her intentions. She would make them understand that she had come not to conquer, but to share, to learn, and perhaps to belong. And with that thought, Zyra turned from the city lights and looked toward the stars again, her determination burning brighter than ever. First contact had been harder than expected, yes, but she would not give up. Not now, not ever. Days turned into weeks, and Zyra slowly began to understand the rhythm of human life. She realized that fear often hid curiosity, and confusion often hid courage. Jake continued to guide her, explaining human habits, customs, and emotions she had never fully grasped. With his help, she learned to move more gently, to speak more slowly, and to offer gestures that humans could interpret as friendly rather than threatening. Small victories became meaningful milestones. A child no longer screamed when she approached. A passerby smiled instead of staring. Each tiny connection felt monumental, like the first stars she had ever seen in a newborn galaxy. One afternoon, Jake brought Zyra to a quiet park by a river. Children played nearby, their laughter rising like music in the air. Zyra held out her hands, letting a soft glow shimmer from her palms. A small orb of light hovered gently above her fingers, dancing like fireflies. She had learned from Jake that humans loved wonder, simple joys that sparked imagination. Slowly, a young girl approached, her eyes wide but curious. Zyra lowered the orb to the girl's hand. Hesitant at first, the girl touched it and gasped as it danced across her fingers without burning. "See," Jake said softly, "it's safe. You can trust her." The girl laughed, the sound pure and bright, and Zyra felt a warmth she could not name. Humans were fragile, yes, but they had courage, curiosity, and hearts capable of joy beyond calculation. Each smile she earned, each hand that reached for hers, taught her more than any study ever could. Zyra began to understand that connection required patience. It was not enough to show knowledge, power, or beauty. Humans needed to feel safe, to see kindness, to experience patience. And as she practiced, she found herself enjoying it, not just as a duty or experiment, but as something deeply fulfilling. The laughter of children, the gentle guidance of Jake, the simple trust of a human hand touching hers, all of it stirred emotions she had never experienced in all her travels across galaxies. Yet it was not only the children who began to reach out. Adults slowly, hesitantly began to observe her differently. One evening, a small group of people gathered to watch her display the constellations in the night sky. Zyra shaped glowing stars and distant planets with her hands, each one orbiting gently as if alive. The humans' eyes reflected wonder, awe, and for some, something else: hope. Zyra realized then that first contact was not just about words or gestures. It was about inspiring trust and showing the beauty of what one could offer without expecting control or obedience. Jake watched her from the side, smiling. "They're starting to see you," he said quietly. Zyra nodded. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Humans were complex, emotional, and messy, but they were learning to see her as more than a threat. Slowly, step by step, she was building a bridge between her world and theirs. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in warm gold and pink light, Zyra and Jake walked along the riverbank. The wind played through his hair, and the water reflected the glowing lights of her presence. She felt a strange, stirring emotion within her, a mixture of joy, hope, and something that felt very much like longing. Across countless worlds, she had never felt anything like this. Humans were unpredictable, chaotic, and fragile, but they had something in their hearts that drew her in. The ability to care, to hope, and to connect deeply despite fear or misunderstanding. "Do you think they'll ever fully understand you?" Jake asked, his voice soft, almost hesitant. Zyra considered the question. Perhaps they would not. Perhaps some humans would always be afraid, always suspicious. But she realized something more important. Understanding did not have to be perfect to matter. Trust, curiosity, and connection were enough. Even a single smile, a single shared moment, could create a bond stronger than fear, suspicion, or doubt. As night fell and stars appeared in the sky, Zyra raised her hands and the constellations shimmered above them. Humans gathered around, watching in awe, some whispering, some pointing, some simply staring. Zyra looked at Jake, then at the humans who had begun to accept her presence. She felt a sense of accomplishment and warmth unlike anything she had known. For the first time, she was not just an alien visitor. She was a friend, a teacher, and perhaps, in some small way, a part of this world. Connection was slow. Connection was hard. Connection could be frightening, but it was also beautiful, transformative, and profoundly human. Zyra realized that this was why she had come, not merely to study humans, but to experience the wonder of their hearts, to feel the raw, messy, and unpredictable power of empathy and trust. And as the river reflected the glowing light of her hands, Zyra smiled. The path of first contact had begun to bloom into something more than challenge or fear. It had begun to bloom into friendship, hope, and the fragile, radiant beauty of understanding. Not everyone welcomed Zyra's presence. Though a small group of humans had begun to trust her, the majority reacted with fear, suspicion, and hostility. News of the alien visitor spread like wildfire. Social media erupted with panic. Governments questioned her intentions, and some people openly demanded she leave the planet immediately. The warmth and connection Zyra had begun to feel seemed fragile, hanging by a thread in a storm of human fear. One morning, as Zyra stepped out of her ship to greet a few children who had returned to play, a crowd had gathered. Some shouted warnings, others waved protest signs, and a few even threw objects in panic. Zyra froze, unsure how to react. Her natural instinct was to retreat, but she could not leave without trying to calm them. She raised her hands, glowing softly, trying to show peace. Yet her light only seemed to alarm them further. Fear, after all, could overpower reason. Jake arrived quickly, weaving through the crowd. He placed himself between Zyra and the humans, his presence grounding her. "They don't understand yet," he said, voice calm but urgent. "You have to show them you're not a threat, but you can't force it." Zyra nodded, her heart aching. First contact had already been difficult, but now it felt impossible. Humans were messy, unpredictable, and emotional beyond calculation. She had never faced anything like this, not even on the most violent planets in the outer galaxies. That evening, Zyra retreated to the quiet observation deck of her ship. She looked down at the city, its lights flickering like fragile stars. Humans were beautiful, chaotic, and full of potential, but they were also afraid, easily swayed by rumors, and quick to judge what they did not understand. Zyra felt a pang of sorrow, a loneliness sharper than any she had ever known. She had come with hope, with curiosity, with a desire to connect. Instead, she was met with suspicion and hostility. Jake appeared beside her, leaning lightly against the railing. "I know it hurts," he said softly, "but this is normal. Humans are afraid of what they don't understand. It's not a rejection of you, just of the unknown. You've made friends. You've shown kindness. That matters. Zyra listened, absorbing his words, yet the ache did not fully leave. She had crossed galaxies to meet humans, and yet some of them could not see her as anything but a threat. The days that followed were a constant struggle. Scientists came to examine her, journalists wrote sensational stories, and strangers whispered or glared whenever she passed. Zyra tried to continue her lessons, her demonstrations of light and knowledge, but fear seemed to follow her wherever she went. A display that had once brought awe now brought panic. Small gestures of kindness were misinterpreted. She began to wonder if first contact was a mistake, if her presence was too disruptive, too frightening for these fragile creatures. Yet in the midst of this conflict, Zyra found moments of hope. A child who had once fled to hide now approached her slowly, hand outstretched, eyes wide with trust. A small group of adults lingered after her demonstrations, asking questions, curious rather than hostile. Jake's quiet encouragement reminded her that even in the storm of fear, understanding could grow. Humans were messy, yes, but they were also capable of courage, curiosity, and adaptation. They could choose trust, even when fear whispered louder. One night, alone on her ship, Zyra allowed herself to feel the full weight of the challenge. Fear, misunderstanding, and rejection were painful, but they were not insurmountable. Across the stars, she had faced hostile civilizations, deadly storms, and worlds that had rejected her presence entirely. Humans were not easier. They were chaotic, emotional, and fragile. But that same chaos held something extraordinary, the potential for growth, empathy, and connection. Zyra clenched her hands, a determined warmth filling her chest. She had not come here to conquer, to force, or to dominate. She had come to understand, to share, and to connect. If fear stood in her way, she would meet it with patience. If hostility arose, she would answer with kindness. She would show humanity that trust could grow, that connection could exist across worlds, that love and understanding were possible even in the midst of chaos. And as she looked out over the city, lights twinkling in the night, Zyra made a silent promise. First contact had been harder than she imagined, yes, but she would not give up. Humans were worth the struggle, worth the patience, and worth every risk. She had crossed galaxies to reach them, and she would find a way to bridge the gap, no matter how difficult the journey. The days that followed were slow, but for Zyra they were filled with small victories that mattered more than she could have imagined. Humans were unpredictable, yes, and often emotional beyond reason, but she began to see glimpses of something extraordinary. Children who had once screamed at her presence now ran to greet her with laughter. Adults who had whispered rumors of fear began to linger, their curiosity edging out suspicion. Zyra discovered that understanding humans was not about force or perfection. It was about patience, consistency, and the quiet power of kindness. Jake remained her guide, her anchor, and her friend. He taught her to see subtle gestures, to notice the way a hesitant smile could mean trust, or a soft tone could calm panic. Zyra learned that humans did not only communicate with words, they communicated with glances, laughter, pauses, and gestures that carried meaning beyond logic. Each day, she felt herself growing closer to them, understanding not just their minds, but their hearts. One afternoon, Zyra returned to the park where she had first tried to share her knowledge of the stars. This time, there was no chaos. A small group of children approached her slowly, eyes wide with curiosity, hands held out with tentative trust. Zyra shaped glowing constellations with her hands, planets orbiting gently above her palms. The children gasped in delight, pointing at the stars and asking questions with excitement. Adults watched nearby, their fear softened by the joy radiating from their children. Zyra felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of accomplishment and a rare, tender happiness. It was in moments like these that Zyra truly understood the beauty of human resilience. Humans were fragile, yes, and their emotions often swung like storms, but they were capable of courage, joy, and trust that defied logic. One child, no older than 7, reached out to touch her hand, and Zyra gently lowered a small glowing orb into it. The child laughed, a pure, bright sound that echoed in Zyra's mind. The laughter was contagious, and even the cautious adults smiled, a small but profound sign that connection was possible. Jake leaned beside her, watching quietly. "You're making a difference," he said softly. Zyra looked at him, a faint smile crossing her face. "I think I'm beginning to understand them," she said. "They are chaotic, unpredictable, fragile, but they are also beautiful in ways I never expected." His eyes met hers, and Zyra felt something in her chest tighten, not pain, not fear, but something like hope, connection, and belonging. Over the following weeks, Zyra continued to build trust. She showed humans her knowledge of distant galaxies, shared lessons about the stars, and offered small gifts from her home world. Each gesture was met with a mixture of curiosity and awe. Slowly, the crowd that had once shouted at her began to shrink, replaced by humans willing to learn, to observe, and to see her not as a threat, but as a friend. Zyra realized that hope was not given. It was earned slowly through patience, understanding, and persistent kindness. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting the city in soft gold and pink light, Zyra and Jake walked along the riverbank. Humans lingered nearby, watching the glowing constellations she created in the night sky. Zyra felt a profound sense of peace she had never known across all her travels. Here, among fragile, emotional, chaotic beings, she had found something rare and precious: hope. Connection was possible, trust could grow, understanding could bloom. She realized that humans were not only capable of fear, but also of courage, not only of chaos, but also of compassion. And in that realization, Zyra understood why she had traveled across galaxies to reach them. They were messy, unpredictable, fragile, but their hearts were vast. They could love, forgive, and reach out even when the world told them to retreat. That was their greatest strength, and Zyra was beginning to see it firsthand. As the night grew darker and the stars above mirrored the lights of her glowing hands, Zyra smiled. The path of first contact had been difficult, and conflict had not disappeared. But hope had taken root, small, fragile, uncertain hope, but hope nonetheless. Humans were beginning to see her, understand her, and even embrace her presence. And in return, Zyra had begun to feel something she had never known in all her travels: belonging. The journey was far from over. Challenges remained, misunderstandings would continue, and fear would rise again. But for the first time, Zyra believed in the possibility of a future where humans and she could coexist, learn from each other, and perhaps even grow together. Hope, she realized, was a powerful force, stronger than fear, stronger than doubt, and more enduring than any obstacle. And as she looked at the humans around her, their faces filled with wonder, curiosity, and cautious trust, Zyra felt something swell inside her. A promise, a connection, and the first true spark of home. Years had passed since Zyra first arrived on Earth. The world had not instantly welcomed her, but she had endured, persisted, and learned to understand the unpredictable hearts of humans. Where fear and suspicion had once dominated, curiosity, courage, and trust had begun to bloom. She had become a part of the lives of those who dared to look beyond the alien shimmer of her form and see her as more than an intruder, as a friend, a teacher, and perhaps even a bridge between worlds. Zyra stood on a hill overlooking the city she had come to know so intimately. The lights below flickered like stars mirrored on the earth. Children laughed in the parks, adults walked and talked, lovers held hands. The chaos that had once seemed overwhelming now felt alive and vibrant, a testament to human resilience and spirit. Humans were messy, yes, emotional beyond measure, and sometimes irrational. But their energy, their courage, their capacity to care left her in awe. Jake joined her quietly, his hand brushing hers. "You've done it," he said softly. "They see you now, they trust you, they understand you in their own way." Zyra looked at him and smiled, feeling the warmth in her chest spread like sunlight. It had not been easy. There had been misunderstanding, fear, anger, and isolation. But those moments of conflict had only made the moments of connection brighter, more precious, more real. She remembered the first time Jake had approached her, hesitant and awed, asking if she was real. She remembered the fear in the eyes of the crowd, the children hiding behind their parents, the harsh whispers of suspicion. And now here she was, standing amidst a world that had once rejected her, now full of humans who had chosen to trust, to reach out, to see her as a friend. The transformation was slow, fragile, and imperfect, but it was real. Zyra knelt beside a group of children playing nearby, letting glowing orbs float gently above their heads. Their laughter was bright and unrestrained, their faces alive with curiosity and joy. She watched as one small girl reached up to touch the light, eyes shining with wonder. Zyra's heart, or the closest approximation of a heart she possessed, swelled with warmth. This, she realized, was the purpose of her journey. Not to conquer, not to command, not to analyze, but to connect. To share knowledge, to inspire curiosity, to create bonds that span the gap between species. Humans were not perfect. They stumbled, feared what they could not understand, and sometimes let prejudice cloud their hearts. But they could also forgive, learn, and love in ways Zyra had never witnessed elsewhere. Their beauty was not in symmetry or intellect alone. It was in their courage, their ability to hope, and their willingness to embrace the unknown. She had traveled across the stars seeking meaning, seeking connection, and here, among these fragile, unpredictable beings, she had found it. Jake took her hand gently, guiding her to stand beside him as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple. "You belong here, Zyra," he said, voice filled with quiet certainty. "Not just with me, but with all of them. You found your place." She gazed at the city, the humans she had come to know and love, and a sense of peace settled over her. First contact had been harder than she expected, more confusing, more emotional, more challenging than any encounter she had faced. But the reward had been greater than anything she could have imagined. Zyra realized then that humans were extraordinary, not because of their technology, not because of their strength, not because of their knowledge, but because of their hearts. Fragile, messy, emotional, chaotic hearts that could still choose hope, love, and trust even in the face of fear. They were unpredictable, but that unpredictability was their strength. They were alive, vibrant, and capable of greatness beyond measure. For the first time in her life, Zyra felt completely at home. Not in the cold perfection of distant worlds, nor among the sterile cities of alien civilizations, but here, in the unpredictability and warmth of humanity. She had crossed galaxies, faced loneliness and fear, and endured misunderstanding. But she had found connection, friendship, and belonging. As the night sky stretched above, filled with stars both near and distant, Zyra raised her hands and let her light shimmer across the park. Humans paused to watch, some smiling, some laughing, some simply staring in awe. And in that moment, Zyra knew she had not only survived first contact, she had triumphed. Humans were extraordinary, and she had become part of their story, just as they had become part of hers. For the first time, she understood fully what it meant to belong. To be seen, not just as an alien, but as a friend, a teacher, and a witness to the boundless potential of humanity. And in that understanding, Zyra smiled, her heart glowing brighter than the stars above, ready for the future she would share with the humans she had come to love.